I can look back and realize growing up, there was God, Jesus, and my dad. And I wasn't measuring up to any of them. I can look back and see, oh my God, I was terrified. Imposter syndrome, coming straight out of the bush into Duke, where people are coming out of Wall Street. I'm coming out of like a dirt path. I was totally intimidated. And this guy said, now, let me just understand this. You had a job at IBM during college, and you left that to join the Peace Corps? Why would you do that? And it wasn't curiosity. It wasn't. He had a judgment in his mind.
Hello and welcome to the Career Journey Podcast, No Wrong Choices. I'm Larry Samuels, and I'll be joined in just a moment by Tushar Saxena and Larry Shea. This episode features the inspiring entrepreneur Mark Rampolla, who's known for founding ZICO Coconut Water and well beyond. Before Mark joins us, please be sure to subscribe, like, or follow No Wrong Choices wherever you're listening right now. Your support helps us to keep bringing these great stories to life. Let's get started. Now joining No Wrong Choices is Mark Rampolla. Mark is the co-founder and managing partner of Ground Force Capital, which invests in companies that transform how people live, eat, and take care of themselves. Before that, he founded ZICO Coconut Water, and he's the author of a great book titled An Entrepreneur's Guide to Freedom, which literally personifies everything we do on this program, which is just learning how to get the most out of your personal and professional journeys. Mark, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Larry. I'm great. Really grateful to be here. I've enjoyed listening to the show, and I just love the concept and title, and I think we'll get into why soon enough.
Yeah, I've had the book. We have the book. Thank you for sharing it with us. I've poured through it, and I literally can't put this thing down. For different reasons, it connects with me very, very strongly. So thank you for putting that together.
You're welcome. Thank you. That means the world to me. I appreciate that.
Hey, so Mark, before we kind of get into your story a little bit, the one thing I kind of want to ask you is that, after having a chance to kind of read through your book, and then obviously we did our own research on you, maybe it's the wrong time to ask this question, but I still kind of want to ask, is that, do you see yourself more as a life coach at this point, or just a guy who is a guy who just understands how to like lead entrepreneurs?
Yeah. Great question. I mean, look, I love my life and career, and I get to dabble in a lot of different ways. I find myself falling into the coaching role quite a bit as a investor, board member, leader on my team, and with entrepreneurs. And anybody that's been through entrepreneurship know it's brutal, man. It's tough, and so it takes a lot of support around you. So yeah, I spent a lot of my time sort of, in many ways, working on the personal things with entrepreneurs, where they get stuck, where they get trapped, their patterns, because those are the things that usually stand between, failure or average success and extraordinary success is the inside job.
All right. So Mark, and the one thing we always ask of all our guests is normally kind of to describe a little bit of who they are. Now, obviously, I just asked you a question about whether or not you're a life coach or just a guy who leads entrepreneurs. But I guess the real question is, so Mark, what is it that you exactly do?
Yeah. So the way I like to think about it is my day job, my main focus is I run this investment firm or co-run it with my partner. And our objective is to find, fund, and support entrepreneurs that are building what we believe are brands and businesses that are going to lead the future of health and wellness, predominantly food, beverage, beauty, brands like that. And so what that means in practicality is a lot of time with talking to entrepreneurs, ones that we're considering, looking at, backing, have backed. And so, I spend a lot of my day, kind of working with leaders and how they lead. And so, yeah, I wind up playing a lot of coaching role, but I consider it sort of a player coach. I like being on the field.
Oh, I like that.
I like being in the game. I'm not ready to hang up my cleats and just advise from the sidelines.
I love it. Larry Shea here. Thank you, Mark, for joining us. We really, really appreciate that. You joining us and giving us so much of your time. Have you always been this inspirational? Because that's what I get from the book. Like, I just want to run through a wall or something, man. Like, that's what I get out of it.
Thanks, Larry. I really appreciate that. I think the simple answer is probably no. Like when I think back, I know you're a big sports fan. I'll share one little story with you. I'm kind of looking back on my life and remembering. In some ways, I guess I was somewhat of a leader. I remember like basketball, high school basketball. At best, I was six man. I was always a good six man. But I one of the proudest awards I ever won in my life was a Mr. Hustle Award.
Oh yeah,
because I did. I would run through walls for my teammates. And it's funny you use that phrase, Larry, because that's the phrase we used at ZICO. We want people that will run through walls for the brand, for us, for the culture, to get things done, whatever it takes. And so I look for that. I love it. And, whether I inspire people or not, that's on them. I can't control that, right? I kind of am who I am. If they take inspiration from that, great. I'll take advantage of that if I can.
Love it. Love it. I know we're going to talk a lot about ZICO and your many other accomplishments, but just for the people who aren't familiar, tell us what ZICO is. And
yeah. So ZICO is a coconut water brand. I happen to have one right here.
There you go.
Perfect.
There's, we'll get back to the story, but basically when I launched this brand in 2004, there was really, there were, at the time, billions of coconut trees around the world, all planted mainly for the meat, the oil, the cream, and the byproducts. The water was literally thrown away. And yet it's a super high electrolyte content beverage that's had been known and loved in the tropical worlds, but we were one of the first ones to bring it to the States and make it sort of mainstream, available for consumers everywhere. So now coconut water is an $8 billion global category. ZICO was one of the largest brands in the U.S. I sold it to Coca-Cola, and then they kind of didn't do it justice. So we bought it back through my firm. So we're giving it another run.
Fantastic. That's amazing. What a great.
It is amazing.
We're gonna dig into this story for sure, because it's just too good, too good. I get the fun part. I get to bring you back to young Mark, running around a Pittsburgh neighborhood, I imagine. Yeah. And what was the dream? What was your childhood like? Did it shape your dreams, or were you just a kid who kind of had no idea what you would accomplish later in life?
Oh, great question, Larry. Both. I was a kid that didn't have a clue what I would do later in life. And I was running around having fun. So I was the youngest of six kids, grew up in a suburb, South Hills of Pittsburgh, an area called Baldwin, which was, very working class for sure. And, but it was great. Like, literally running around like during the weekends and nights and summers and vacations. I would just go off, right, to the woods to play basketball with friends, to run around, get in trouble, do whatever. And
it's not how those days are over, right?
Right.
It seems like that type of life is totally over.
Now, I will say this as well. Amazing. And I wouldn't say I was raised by wolves, but, when I look at the influences around me as a young kid, yeah, my parents, I'd like to be a little bit more. I was a lot more aware and conscious with my kids. My parents, I think, after having 5 kids, were like, whatever, just stay alive.
As long as you don't die, right? As long as you don't kill yourself,
but when I think about the things I learned about what it means to be a man or a guy, right, from my brother's older friends who were knuckleheads, you know what I mean? Like, but I look back and laugh. But I had a great childhood. I mean, God, I did. I can tell you for sure, I wanted to be a truck driver at some point. That was like big trucks.
Wow.
Big trucks. Like, I don't know what age.
Very Pittsburgh. That's a very Pittsburgh thing, right?
Might be an artist. God, I can't even remember. It just wasn't. Nobody talked about careers or. Going to college was a pretty big deal in my community. So, but it was a great childhood. No complaints.
What did your parents do?
Yeah, this is interesting. My dad was a nuclear physicist.
No way.
I didn't get that gene.
No way.
But he was, he grew up in New York. college at Notre Dame straight through to his PhD, and then got a job in Pittsburgh in nuclear power. And so he spent his entire career there. He did decide at one point he was against nuclear power for defense. So he had been on the defense side. He went to the commercial side. And, but he never, was a brilliant, brilliant guy. But, for someone that could split the atom, he was like, talk about ambition, no career ambition at all. Kept basically the first job. He was an engineer, basically never managed anyone his entire career.
What drove him? I'm curious.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great question. And I'll come back to my mom too. He was driven by, early in his career, I would say, math and science. He wanted to understand, he wanted to solve. I do think I talked to him about this. He was certainly influenced by the, sort of anti-communist rhetoric, the Red, Scare and blah, blah, blah. And that he was part of, saving, humanity in a way. So that there was some ambition, some sort of drive for him there. But interestingly, over time, what motivated him most was being a good Catholic. He was very, very Catholic, almost an activist Catholic. Like his view was, both of my parents, Jesus is a radical. So you got to get out there and protest. You got to fight. You got to support the poor. You got to do all these things. Beautiful, beautiful upbringing. But I'll get to, kind of how the pros and cons, how that influenced me in my life. But it was a beautiful, that really motivated him. And so, my mom was a potter and a counselor and a religious directions, person. And so, a little bit later in life, I definitely know she had a little bit of resentment about my dad not sort of dedicating himself more to finances and, building their own security in a way.
Your experience and my experience probably growing up was a little similar. My father was also a scientist. My father was a chemist.
Oh, wow.
My father was a chemist. My mother a retired psychologist. So my father actually did go the route of trying to become an entrepreneur himself. But yes, the gene of Tushar being a chemist did not rub off on me either. And he was actually also a physicist as well. So,
Wow.
So my father was, super, super smart. I obviously did not get that gene. How much of an influence do you see now, years later, that your parents put upon you? Obviously, you said, your father was not motivated to look at the finances as a young man, but your mother had, I wouldn't say resentment, but maybe she felt that should have been an emphasis more as a young man. Yeah. How do you feel that shaped you?
Oh boy, great comment and question there. What I would say is, I used to think that up until after I sold ZICO, I would have said pretty consistently, I'm motivated. I am inspired by my parents to make a positive impact in the world, and whatever that be, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to do that. And that the influence or the drive to make money, be successful, that's all society, right? That's all society. That's what's driving me. And I was in turmoil for many years. I actually look back and realize that my father was an extraordinary, powerful influence on me. And it wasn't always positive for me. And everybody has their different experiences of this. But I can look back and realize growing up, there was God, Jesus, and my dad. And I wasn't measuring up to any of them. And so I now
big shoes.
Yeah. I had a rebellious streak. I had a troublesome streak. I had an adventurous streak. And I did some things in my life that, I'm sure my parents would not have been very proud of, but that's me, right? And I was human. I was young and I was doing this, but
and that's life.
but I had that conflict, like, ooh, am I really living up? Am I really living up? So
Yeah.
in some ways I felt guilty about my drive for business, my drive for entrepreneurship, like it was a flaw in some ways. I did. I finally came to terms with that and can see it for what it is now. But that took a lot of work, a lot of work.
That's so fascinating. I'm just so curious, we all have this image of successful entrepreneur and like what that represents. And some of it is intelligence, coming up with a brilliant idea and executing it and learning and growing. Were you a good student growing up, or is that you weren't book smart, but you just had other ways of kind of guile and getting by and getting great ideas?
Yeah, I was decently book smart, but what I remember growing up was I would tutor friends of mine regularly, and their parents and my parents all thought I was pretty smart. But then when the tests would come back,
they would fail.
Oh no, they all got
better
D's.
than me, right? I can remember
the other
I
one.
remember this one friend of mine, her parents saying, wait a second, you tutor our daughter in math or chemistry, whatever it was, and she did better than you? Like, how does that happen? And I didn't realize until way later I had ADHD.
Yeah.
And so, and honestly, I didn't think I was very smart for years. I didn't, because I'm like, well, I think I'm decently smart. I can understand these concepts, but the tests certainly don't show it. My grades don't show it. I also learned, like, when I first went to Central America with a Peace Corps, man, I think I took 3 years of high school Spanish. I couldn't tell you the difference between cuando, when, and cuánto, how much. I couldn't. I don't learn that way. I don't. But then when I was there, I'm totally fluent in Spanish, and I became fluent from being on the ground, immersion. That's the way I learn. And so, that's one of the things I write about in the book, the importance of getting to know yourself, right? Oh, okay, this is how I learn. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's beautiful, right? Now play to my strengths for how I learn, but that took me a long time.
And it's one of the most important things for all of us to learn. To your point, I learn by doing. I don't learn by reading. I learn by doing. Yeah. I can, but I do much better when immersed in the real thing. You mentioned the Peace Corps. Take us to the Peace Corps. How did that wind up on your radar screen? Yeah. What were your passions that took you there?
Yeah, look, I think I'd be certainly that was an influence from my parents. Although my parents were an older generation than the Peace Corps generation. That sort of mindset was, I'd say, applicable. In my family was, hey, be socially responsible. Be active, contribute to the community, all those things, give back in many ways. And so that was in my mind, as was, sort of the developing world. Like, it was literally dinner table conversation when I was growing up. What was happening in Central America? Well, the U.S. is invading Guatemala or supporting this regime, and the Jesuits were killed in El Salvador. Well, this is dinner table conversation because my parents wanted us to learn, and they had a certain point of view. It was America Magazine, if you've heard of that, the Jesuit magazine around the house. So that sort of mindset was there. Yet I went to college, for liberal arts, but also for business. And I remember going to a career fair and seeing lots of booths of different companies. And this is in the Midwest. So it was, Allen Bradley and Ford and whatever else.
Which school?
What's that? Oh, Marquette in Wisconsin.
Marquette. Got it.
And I interviewed for a few of those companies, and I actually had a good job during college at IBM, so I could get a good job. But I also didn't tick a lot of the boxes, and my grades weren't that great, frankly. And so I remember going by looking at all these companies. I'm dressed up in a suit and tie, whatever. There's a little Peace Corps booth, like a table, like a card table with a little. And I remember saying to the young woman that was there, "You guys don't," I almost walked past it. I turned around, came back, and I said, "You don't have business programs, do you?" And she said, "Yeah, actually we do. We have two sorts of programs. One are sort of small business development programs. We also have this whole program that's emerging with with Eastern Bloc, right? This is right soon after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So yeah, we have business programs. And I'm like, well, my God, this could be incredible, you know? So I thought about it, researched it, and I applied. And back then, and I think it's probably the same, yeah, unless you have a real specialty, and fresh out of college, I really didn't. You put in your application and you go where they send you, right? Or you get an opportunity wherever it may be. I didn't know if it was going to be, South Pacific or Africa or wherever, and it wound up being Costa Rica. It was the now pre zip lines and Four Seasons, right? But still, beautiful, beautiful place.
So, what was the experience like in Costa Rica for you, and how old were you at this point?
What would I be, 21, fresh out of college. It was incredible and difficult at times. They run a good program. So, there's an orientation for a week or so, and then everybody has to, at least this is the way it was then, everybody has to live with a family during 3 months of training. And the training is language and culture and the skills you're going to use in your field. And so I remember day one, I'm dropped off and there's a family that's taking me. I speak nothing.
You don't know Quando from Quanto.
No. And I'm sitting there, they're feeding me, they're trying to talk to me. I feel like my head is going to explode. And I just couldn't wait to get to bed. But I'm looking around like I have a bedroom, and it's a teeny house. And there's a mother, father, 2 kids, a nephew, and a grandmother. And I'm like, there's one bathroom. Like, where do they sleep? Right? Somehow it took me, I didn't know until like days later how they had organized themselves, because they always let me have the room and have the bathroom and sort of get my sleep. And the next morning I wake up and I start, learning Spanish, learning little by little. It was an incredible experience. And then after those 3 months, I moved to a town that's supposed to be my site, where I'm assigned to a local bank, a cooperative, that I'm supposed to run a little loan program, and kind of figure out how to be valuable, how to be helpful, and it was tough. I definitely struggled with a little bit of depression for the first time in my life. Like, what the hell am I doing? Like, what's going on here?
Or was it just homesickness?
Yeah, good question. I mean, definitely not clinical depression, right?
You were homesick,
beyond just homesick as well, because I will say, it's the first time in my life I started to have sort of an existential crisis. Like, what the fuck am I doing, and what's this all about? Like, because I had time on my hands, right? I was actually bored at times. I read a ton. I started journaling. And it became, when I look back, that was a transformative period, because I gave myself space. And the power of that space, of boredom, I used to think that was a terrible word. Now I understand the power of just letting the mind roam, right? And dealing with whatever comes up, sadness, anger, whatever the feelings are, they're there.
I love that, because emotion is such a big part of your book, which we're going to talk a lot more about. In our experience doing this show, No Wrong Choices, people who travel tend to be more open, more adventurous, more ready to conquer whatever comes in front of them, whatever they need to accomplish. But I just don't want to skip this part, because I know it's big. You asked the Peace Corps table if they had business. So the dream of being a businessman and an entrepreneur had clearly sparked at that point, and now you're starting to put all those pieces together. Is that how it happened?
It is. Very good point, Larry. That took me some time, but I think, and I'd be hard pressed to remember like when that first clicked for me. I'll go back to high school and tell you, I've thought back of this so deeply, but the best thing I can remember is that the most sort of successful business person I remember growing up was Mr. Daly. He was a wonderful, wonderful man that I think he would have been the Maxwell House Coffee sales rep for Southwestern Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, right? It's like he's a sales rep, right? But just just a
Yeah.
little bit nicer. He was also very social. He was a sociable guy, a little nicer home, a little nicer car, right? And there was something there that was like intriguing to me. And then, but I remember up until right before college, I went to college, I wanted to do physical therapy because I had a crush on a hot young, woman in the physical therapy. So I had a hemophobia from football,
Totally valid.
right? And then how did I shift from physical therapy to business? I don't know. It's probably realizing like to get the girl, I probably need money, And honestly, when I look back, I'm comfortable owning now so much of my only early life. So much of my life has been motivated by, by a desire to sort of impress and get and enter and women in a way. So
You'd be surprised how many of our guests that has been a motivation for them.
yeah. But I'll give you a little parallel that's to some stuff I talk about in my book. I can remember vividly being 15 and one summer seeing a girl that I really liked that I think was probably a couple years older than me. And I'm like, you know what? I can't drive. Like, I don't have a shot. When I'm 16, oh man, I'm going to get the girls. I'm going to get the girls. I'm going to get the girls. And then I'm 16. It's like, well, you know what? I'm not 18 yet, Right? And then at 18, it's like, I'm not 21. I'm not. And I remember at some point realizing, oh my God, is this the way it happens forever? Right? Like there's always this next.
You keep coming up with something.
Yeah, some excuse, some limiting belief, some barrier to living life now, going for what you want now. And so that's many in many ways.
Well, you clearly learned how to push through.
Yeah, shaped
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
So the Peace Corps, what did that set you up for? I guess what was your primary takeaway from that experience, and what did that set you up for?
Wow, good question, Larry. Let's see. My primary takeaway was I can be, and I am, a self-contained person, a self-contained entity that can figure out how to live a life in anywhere, in any situation. I can figure out how to be happy or fulfilled in any situation. And it's not about money because I made $186 a month. And that, oh my God, I would never trade that for the world. Never. So I can figure it out. And what that served me is unbelievable because I think it began the creation of resilience. Another word I love for this is imperturbable, the ability to just be calm in the storm, just to figure things out. Because then after the Peace Corps, I backpacked around Central America for a couple months with a few bucks in my pocket, and just camped or hiked or did whatever. And so I think that experience laid the foundation for me to be able to step into a new job, meet a customer or supplier, meet someone and just figure out how to be me, how to be me. And that wound up being really incredible for my career pre-entrepreneurship and certainly in entrepreneurship.
All right. So what was the next step from Peace Corps to backpacking?
Yeah.
What was the next step right after that?
So I still at that time was under the illusion that corporations run the world, the real power, the real money, the real influence is in corporations. And the way to get a corporate job is an MBA. But I felt looking back, I can see I felt a little bit guilty about doing only an MBA, given my sort of family background. And I also had a real interest in the environment. Costa Rica has beautiful natural resources. I spent a lot of time doing projects in that. So I decided I want to do a joint MBA in environmental management degrees. But I also believed that might help differentiate me to get me into a better MBA program because it wasn't just an MBA. I wasn't competing head to head with just that. But I didn't have, I had no money and applications were expensive. They were $50 or whatever, which is like, almost half of my month's salary. So I applied to one school, Duke. And I was a basketball, fanatic growing up. I loved Duke. And so I thought, look, if I get into Duke, I go. If I don't, I figure out something else. And I got in. So I went to Duke, a joint MBA and Master's of Environmental Management program.
That's a heck of a school because you said your grades weren't that great in college, right?
No.
That was quite the reach, and you got into the reach.
I can tell you, yes. And I'll tell you 3 reasons. One is I did finally, I tested well on the standardized test. So what is it, the GMAT or whatever?
The GMAT, yeah. I took that too.
I did well on that. Second of all, there's no question the Peace Corps helped. I'll tell you other places it didn't help getting certain jobs, but I think that was a differentiator. And I don't know if it was Larry or Tushar that said it about international, like not so common back then to have someone that spoke another language, had traveled the way I did. So that was a differentiator. And I will give credit where it's due. A very dear friend of mine, Alicia Wilson, her father was a New York lawyer. She was in another volunteer program in the same town I was. Her dad was in town, and he was the only person I'd ever met who was like, let me tell you about, so who are you writing your application for? Let me tell you who he is. He's 50 years old. He's tired. It's end of the day. Tell him a story. Keep it short, big font, like know your audience.
Nice.
So
right?
Smart.
And boom. I'm like, oh, okay, I can do that. And in many ways, that started my writing journey, was to like know your audience and be, intentional about what you're trying to communicate. And I think I wrote a great essay. I don't even remember what the hell it is, but
whatever it was, it got you into Duke.
It worked.
I'm in.
That should be in the appendix of the book.
It worked. I love it. So let's talk about the pressures of that higher education, though. I mean, you must have been feeling that at this point. How did you handle the pressure of that? I'm sure it served you well in the business world later on, but you must be feeling that. And I know just from reading your book and so forth that you are carving out time for meditation, for free writing, things of this nature. How did you cope? What were your mechanisms? And are you figuring out the tools that are going to literally propel you to entrepreneurial superstardom later on?
Wow.
I mean, really.
God, Larry, what a question. Yes. I wouldn't have thought about it that way. You're helping me see it that way, though. But yeah, look, I'll share a couple things. I had, I think what people might call, what do they call them? Like constructive coping mechanisms and destructive coping mechanisms, right? So let's talk about the destructive ones first. Those are the fun ones. I drank like a fish, like a lot of young kids at that time. And that I can see that was a coping mechanism, and not my proudest moments, but hey, I did that, and that because I was stressed, I can look back and see, oh my God, I was terrified. Imposter syndrome, coming straight out of the, bush into, Duke, where people are coming out of Wall Street. I'm coming out of like a dirt path. I was totally intimidated, Jesus. And so, this dream school. So yeah. And I did also begin to develop some more positive coping mechanisms. I think by then I wouldn't have known or said I was ADHD, but I think I knew I needed to organize myself in a certain way. And so I started to get organized, like really organized. Okay, what's going to matter? What do I need to focus on? How do I, do this workflow? I found what I was good at. And so in a lot of teamwork, that was beginning the era of sort of a lot of team projects. I was a great team member. Like I just dove in and could do whatever. I was really great at presenting. I was good at, sort of some of the strategy work, but then I wasn't the finance whiz. I wasn't the marketing whiz. So I think I was a good team member, and I think that helped a lot. What else? There's definitely some parallels in some foundation laying that served me well later. That being said, I I'm not like if somebody wants to go be a consultant or honestly, in big corporate, you want to do some big corporate or some consulting type jobs or maybe investment banking, but even that you don't need to. MBAs are, they're not as necessary as they might have been a long time ago, right? So I have no regrets, but I don't look back and say what I really learned, the skills I really learned were later and before. When I had this job at IBM during college, I learned a ton. And then my first job after grad school, man, I learned a ton. So it was important, but I wouldn't say it was the most foundational, learning of my career.
You had a very unconventional background coming into business school at Duke.
Yeah.
I would say in some sense, many of your cohorts say is like kind of a hippie-ish in that sense. So yeah. So
yeah, for sure.
How did many of your classmates view you? Obviously, you said you're a great teammate, but for them, the path was set, right? They went from the suburbs to high school to college. We're going to Wall Street next. You did not have that kind of an upbringing. You had a very unconventional path at that point. So how'd they view you?
Boy, that's a great question. I haven't thought about that for a while. It's always fascinating to think how we view ourselves versus how others view us. I think I took on a little bit of the identity of the hippie, of the, I was in some ways, but I also I had a bike with a milk crate and bungee cords on top of it when they were driving nice cars. You know what I mean? So and I played that up a little bit, I'm sure. And looking back, I can see that I think most of my colleagues saw something in me I didn't see in myself. I remember one guy was probably the smartest guy in our class, as far as I was concerned. It was just a wonderful guy as well. He was I think he was a BCG consultant beforehand. And, I wasn't spending time with people like this. And I remember one thing he said, we were on a number of groups together, and I think he really respected me and we did some good work together. And I remember at some point he said, I was maybe dancing around getting a little confrontational with somebody. And he said, Mark, you couldn't piss somebody off if you tried, so don't be afraid of standing your ground, of making a point, And so I think people appreciated me, saw me as unique. I think I always had a little bit different perspective. And I'm sure it was a little bit of an oddball and probably a breath of fresh air in some ways, but I'll have to ask them. I'm still good friends with a bunch of them. I'll have to check in with them.
Mark, you brought something up a couple of times that has caught my attention. You've mentioned ADHD, and I'm curious. I have ADHD, which I had no idea until my very late 40s. And it was an experience for me where I discovered that I had this ADHD, inattentive presentation is what they call it. And it was very interesting discovering that later in life, because I then looked back at my journey and I looked at the things that I gravitated towards organically. Yeah. And I'm kind of curious if your experience was similar.
Oh, absolutely. I would say a couple things around that, Larry. One is I first looked back kind of critically, like, oh, imagine what my life could be if I had that identified and blah, 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 right? Which, of course, as I write about, the stories we tell ourselves, right? Maybe, maybe not, right? The other thing is I see that whether I gravitated because of it or there's a correlation of creativity, ideas, newness. My experience is there is a creative energy that comes when I get that spur. When I get that spur of energy, watch out. And so I've learned to channel that. It happened earlier, but I didn't know how to channel it. I would spin out of control. I'd get energized, I'd go crazy, I'd go productive, and then I'd crash, But I also look back and realize, and I forget if it was which one of you asked earlier, I can't actually see I did develop some coping mechanisms because I had that, like, I needed to get my ass organized. And particularly post grad school, my first real job, I realized, like, man, I got to get my stuff together or I will die here. Like, and so the good thing is I developed some tools and techniques that worked for me, and I think did work for an ADHD type brain that I have employed. I'll give you one prime example. I took today off. I've been running like crazy for a while. And I'll share this. I was supposed to go, I was in New York yesterday, supposed to go to Toronto this morning until I realized I don't have my passport.
Oh, no.
Yeah, long story. I haven't done that in 30 years. 30 years.
Yeah.
Because I'm organized. I have it in my backpack in this way because I know I could forget things, right? But I got back late last night. I woke up this morning and I'm like, I am beat and I need some creative time, man. I need to clear my head. And is that anyone? Perhaps. It's certainly me, but I think there's something about ADHD as well. When I get into that creative energy, man, I go hard and fast, but I need breaks. And so I cleared my calendar. I worked out, I meditated, I read, I painted, and then I had this.
How old were you when you discovered that you had it?
Yeah, you know what? Probably a similar age, probably late 40s, I would guess. Yeah. And I'll tell you what was really helpful for me was, now everybody on my team is my partner was a Colgate grad, competitive athlete, he was a hedge fund guy, ran $1 billion hedge fund at a young age. This guy has no problem focusing. My whole team are all ex-investment bankers in private equity, all of them. They can focus. I never could have had those jobs. I couldn't do those sort of jobs. Now I can accept, and we do a lot of work internally on knowing what we call our zones of genius and playing to each other's strengths, because I know I can't do what they do, but they can't do what I do. And so that realization helped me say, oh, okay, this is not a problem, right? It's a knowingness of myself. It's a wiring or whatever it is. There are a lot of strengths to that, right? How do I play to them? How do I utilize them better? And then how do I understand how to create a rhythm that I don't spin out of control like I used to,
I knew after reading your book, you were going to give us all sorts of little gems like that. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Let's start moving your career journey post-graduate school. So, what were those first jobs? You said you learned so much right out of school with those first jobs. What were those first jobs? How are you getting them? And is that coming easy to you? Because I'm sure people out there want to know, how do I get that job?
Yes. Not coming easy to me at all. So my experience in grad school was, Duke has an amazing, network. They bring top companies on the campus. So particularly with the MBA program, you can kind of go through the program and have a pretty good shot at getting a job, usually a pretty good job. And I probably could have, but honestly, my experience was, this is again, some years ago, that, I was interviewing for these bigger jobs and, typical corporate jobs, that the ones that were coming on the campus. And I wasn't getting a lot of callbacks. I wasn't. And I remember one in particular, it was someone like, it may have not been this, it was a big industrial company, something like Allen Bradley. They have an MBA program, they bring a few people in, development, blah, blah, blah. So I'm in the interview and the guy says, this is why I've been rejected enough times already. I was getting to a point where I knew something needed to change. And this guy said, now, let me just understand this. You had a job at IBM during college and you left that to join the Peace Corps? Why would you do that? And it wasn't curiosity. It wasn't. He had a judgment in his mind. Right. And so I stood up and I said, thank you very much. If you don't get that, this isn't going to be right. This isn't going to be right.
This isn't right.
I walked out and I decided I got to do my own job search. I got to do my own. And so I stopped doing anything on campus. And I decided, okay, what do I want? What can I get? I had a lot of debt, so I needed a job. I didn't know everything I know today, of course, but I also, what connections can I build from my school? And given I was doing the joint MBA in environmental management program, there were some interesting opportunities there. One was the School of the Environment at Duke University was originally the School of Forestry. So they had a lot of legacy relationships in the forest products industry. One big company was International Paper. At the time, they were a massive landowner, but also they had a lot of different businesses for packaging and paper and other stuff. I was on an exchange in Europe, and I somehow, I don't remember how I got this, learned that a guy that was really supportive of the school, I think his kids were at Duke, was the president for International Paper Europe, was in Belgium where I had my exchange, and I asked for a coffee. Met with him, and he said, because they were very much on my target list, like big company, like them, I think they'll maybe hire me. And it was interesting, work in sort of this environmental and business arena. And so he said, yeah, look, here's a couple people you should talk to. They're in Memphis. So he introduced me to a couple people there, and I wound up finding this little division called beverage packaging, and they hired one MBA a year, and brought them into the corporate headquarters. And then their hope was to eventually move them out to go run some businesses overseas. So my predecessor was a Harvard MBA. Part of his objective is he had to recruit a replacement so he could go take a job in Latin America. And so I literally think it was a slate of one,
Wow.
And also how many people are coming out with speak Spanish, have lived in Latin America, right?
Sure.
So that I tell people, like, I love competition, but I don't always have to seek it out, right? Like there's, like, why not be a big fish in a small pond? Why not position yourself that you're unique? It's you. You're the option. And I've seen that happen again and again and again. If you've got the perfect grades, if you want to compete, you want to go through fine, go through that typical program, typical process. But by and large, I've found build your own, it's your life, it's your career, it's your ball, it's your bat, it's your field. Where do you want to play?
No wrong choices, baby. That's what we talk about all the time.
No wrong choices.
No wrong choice. No wrong choice.
That concludes part one of our conversation with Mark Rampolla. In part two, we follow his leap into entrepreneurship and the creation of ZICO Coconut Water, the brand he built from a simple idea into a hugely successful company. Before we go, if you haven't already, please follow or subscribe to the show. Your support helps us keep bringing these great stories to life. You can also follow No Wrong Choices on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. On behalf of Larry Shea and Tushar Saxena, I'm Larry Samuels. Thank you again for joining us.